Madhava Kunja Bhakti Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki, ISKCON's founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki, Sri Sri Radha Radhanath Ki, Sri Giri Govardhan Ki, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Ki, Sankirtan Yagya Ki, Gopremanande. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to the Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 18. Prithu Maharaj milks the earth planet. Text 6. Right, okay. Pura Srishta Hi Oshadayo Brahmana Ya Sampate Ujamana Maya Drishta Asadbir Adrita Vratai Purasishtai Yoshadayo Brahmanaya Vishampate Ujamana Maya Drishta Asadbir Adrita Vratai Purasrishta Yoshadayo Brahmanaya Vishampate Ujamana Maya Drishta Asadbir Adrita Vratai Purasrishta Yoshadayo Brahmanaya Vishampate Ujamana Maya Drishta Asadbir Adrita Vratai
Purashrishthaya Shadayo Brahmanaya Vishampate Ujamana Maya Drishta Asadhir Adrita Vratai
Purasrishthaya Sudhayo Brahmanaya Vishampate Muchyamana Maya Drishta Asadhira Dhurat Pratai
Purashishtaya Asadayo Brahmanaya Vishampate Ujjamana Maya Drishta Asadi Drutta Vrate
Purashistaya Shadayo Amanaya Vishampate Ujjamana Maya Drishta Asatya Drita Patai Purashistaya Shadayo Amanaya Vishampate Ujjamana Maya Drishta Asatya Drita
Pura, in the past, Shrishta, created, he certainly, Ashadaya, herbs and food grain, Brahmana, by Lord Brahma, Ya, all those which, Vishampate, O King, Ujjamana, being enjoyed, Maya, by me, Drishta, seen, Asadbi, by non-devotees, Adrita Vratai, devoid of all spiritual activities. Yes, translation, my dear King, the seeds, roots, herbs and grains which were created by Lord Brahma in the past are now being used by non-devotees who are devoid of all spiritual understanding. This is Mother Earth, right? It's Mother Earth who's speaking. Purported by Srila Prabhupada. Lord Brahma created this world for the use of the living entities, but it was created according to a plan that all living entities might come into it to dominate it for sense gratification, would be given, according to a plan that all living entities who might come into it to dominate it for sense gratification would be given directions by Lord Brahma in the Vedas in order that they might ultimately leave it and return home back to Godhead. All necessities grown on earth, namely fruits, flowers, trees, grains, animals, and animal byproducts, were created for use and sacrifice for the satisfaction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vishnu. However, the planet Earth in the shape of a cow herein submits that all these utilities are being used by non-devotees who have no plans for spiritual understanding. Although there are immense potencies within the earth for the production of grains, fruits, and flowers, this production is checked by the earth itself when it is misused by non-devotees who have no spiritual goals. Everything belongs to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and everything can be used for his satisfaction. Things should not be used for the sense gratification of the living entities. This is the whole plan of material nature, according to the directions of this material nature. In this verse, the words asadbi and adrita vratai are important. The word asadbi refers to the non-devotees. The non-devotees have been described in Bhagavad Gita as dushkritana, miscreants, mudha, asses or rascals, naradama, lowest of mankind, and mayaya paritakyana, those who have lost their knowledge to the power of the illusory energy. All these persons are asat, non-devotees. Non-devotees are also called Griha Vrata, whereas the devotee is called Drita Vrata. The whole Vedic plan is that the misguided, conditioned souls who have come to lord it over material nature should be trained to become Drita Vrata. This means that they should take a vow to satisfy their senses or enjoy material life only by satisfying the senses of the Supreme Lord. Activities intended to satisfy the senses of the Supreme Lord Krishna are called Krishnarte Kila Cheshta. This indicates that one can attempt all kinds of work, but one should do so to satisfy Krishna. This is described in Bhagavad Gita as Yagyartat Karma. The word Yagya indicates Lord Vishnu. We should work only for his satisfaction. In modern times, Kali Yuga, however, people have forgotten Vishnu altogether, and they conduct their activities for sense gratification. Such people will gradually become poverty-stricken, for they cannot use things which are to be enjoyed by the Supreme Lord for their own sense gratification. If they continue like this, there will ultimately be a state of poverty, and no grains, fruits, or flowers will be produced. Indeed, it is stated in the 12th canto of Bhagavatam that at the end of Kali Yuga, people will be so polluted that there will no longer be any grains, wheat, sugar cane, or milk. Purasishta Yoshadayo Brahmanaya Vishampate Bhujamana Mayadrishta Asabir Adrita Vratai. My dear king, the seeds, roots, herbs, and grains which were created by Lord Brahma in the past are now being used by non-devotees who are devoid of all spiritual understanding. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastijade Jatarne Sri Krishna Caitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanchka Patrubhyas Jakripas Sindhubhya Evacha Paritanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Yes, so I just looked actually just before we started. Actually, Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur's purport for this verse, which is, I think, just one sentence, it's extremely short, but he makes the point that this verse is the first of 6 verses which are going to be discussing the same point, the same theme, about why, because I think you're all aware that King Prithu was very angry. He was incensed, actually, like violently angry, you could say, because the Earth planet was not producing foodstuffs and necessities, particularly foodstuffs, as she normally does. Yes, and he was going to punish her very severely. But now she's explaining why she is withholding. She's withholding for a very specific reason, and a very important reason, which, you know, if this Krishna consciousness movement doesn't spread enough over the next however many years, you know, it's going to have devastating effects on this planet and the people living on this planet. In that, already, I mean, it's okay that, you know, the planet is not supplying so much as it may have been doing. You know, my mind remarked the other day, we were driving somewhere around here and people were saying, you know, these paper sacks of potatoes, 10 kgs. I remember when they were 15 kgs. Maybe some of you remember. They were 15. And then one day suddenly, they were 10. But they were the same price as the 15. And, you know, I mean, we're all well aware that I think that things are becoming more and more expensive, including foodstuffs. Becoming more and more expensive, and as Prabhupada explained at the end of the purport, that unless there's a change, like a real change, of offering sacrifice to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, it's just going to get worse, and worse, and worse. And of course, in the 12th canto, it's explained there that there will not be any vegetables and things. You know, I noted that Prabhupada referred to sugar cane. Some people would protest. Sugar, it's poison. Anyway, Hare Krishna. Prabhupada, although he was diabetic to some degree. But anyway, there's a principle here, there's a very important principle here, that the earth was objecting to being exploited by non-devotees, particularly in terms of edibles and, you know, things related to edibles, animal byproducts. She's objecting to that, and therefore she's withholding from the asat be the non-devotees. Yeah, the asadhus, those who are not sadhus, not devotees. Just like Putana in the famous verse, what is it, 3:23. She is referred to, what, Aho Bakiyam, Stanakalakutam. Sorry? Asadvi. She's referred to as Asadvi. She's not a sadhu. Which, you know, in a general sense means she's not a devotee. Yes, so there's so many followers of Putana around. It's amazing. You know, this drama in America at the moment, but it's been in other countries, about abortion, and there are so many people who just want abortion in some for reasons which may not be that bad, but many. Like, I remember when Ireland, which has historically been a very staunch Catholic country, Southern Ireland, I mean the Republic of Ireland, but they had a national referendum for the whole people, all that the country could vote. Should we keep, because they had no abortion. Should we keep no abortion, or should we allow abortion? And the abortion people won. And there were photos of these young women dancing in the streets and just celebrating that we can have abortion. Like, it's just fantastic. We're so happy. We can kill our children. Anyway, such is life in the material world. These asadvi, who are adrita vratai, these non-devotees who are devoid of all spiritual activities, So anyway, in the beginning of the purport, Srila Prabhupada refers to Bhagavad Gita chapter 3, verse 10. Very important verse actually in this regard. Sahayagya prajashishtva puravacha prajapati anena prasavishyadvam eshavos vishna kamaduk. In the beginning of creation, the Lord of all creatures sent forth generations of men and demigods along with sacrifices to Vishnu and blessed them by saying, be thou happy by this yajna, sacrifice, because its performance will bestow upon you everything desirable for living happily and achieving liberation. I remember back in the old days, Bhagavad Gita just said, everything desirable for living happily. But I guess Prabhupada must have, in the tapes, the recordings, he must have mentioned achieving liberation. Living happily and achieving liberation. It's such an important thing, and Prabhupada discusses this at some length here in the earlier part or throughout the purport, basically, particularly the earlier part, that all the necessities grown on earth, fruits, flowers, trees, grains, animals, and animal byproducts, were created for use in sacrifice. That's what they were created for use in sacrifice, for the satisfaction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vishnu. But it's just not happening much nowadays. It's just, I suppose there's some people, like Dharmatma type people in India who do that sort of thing, but otherwise, I remember in the early days of ISKCON, until Prabhupada found out a bit about it, there was a practice of, if you're out on book distribution was sort of the common thing, and you didn't have any prasadam with you and it was lunchtime and, you needed something, you'd go into a shop and buy something, whatever. And there was this practice of, Sankirtan offerings, quick offerings. Om Tat Sat, thanks a lot. Until Prabhupada found out about it. I think I mentioned, did I, the other day, about offering the shops? Was it here? Oh, I didn't mention that. They go into a shop, and like a supermarket, and offer the whole shop. And they go up, where did I? Anyway, somewhere I was talking about that.
NGP. Sunday class.
Oh, was it? Okay. And then they go up by the water reservoir and offer the whole water reservoir, supposedly. I think this was their idea. Prabhupada heard about it and said, no, don't do that. So anyway, but the point, the sort of fundamental bottom line basic point is that when something is created for a particular person by whoever was the brains and whoever was the person behind it, it should be used for that. Yes, it should be used for that. And it may be possible to use it to some degree for some other purpose. Like I remember being in the class Prabhupada gave on his Vyasa Puja Day 1973. It's in the database. And Prabhupada talks about how the world has been created by the Lord for a purpose. And if you need to know the purpose of, some item having been manufactured, you need the instruction book. And Prabhupada said, so similarly, this creation was created by the Lord, and if you want to know why, you should look in the instruction book, which is the Vedic literatures. And then Prabhupada said, like this microphone, he was speaking into a microphone, it has been manufactured. And there is, I forget exactly what he said, but to that effect, that someone manufactured it, and there's an instruction manual. Almost inevitably, when something is created, there's an instruction manual. And if you want to know about its functioning, look in the instruction manual. So, yeah, and afterwards, I remember some of us were discussing that point about the microphone, and someone raised the point that, with one of these sort of metal, fairly solid type of microphones, you could use it as a weapon. You could hit someone with it, made of metal, and it weighs, I don't know, whatever it weighs something. You could do that. But that's not what it was manufactured for. It's a misuse. And as a result, if you really get into that, you'll just destroy it. Because you're using it for something it was not manufactured for. So that's what is happening here on this planet. That the idea, the principle of sacrifice, all these things were created for use in sacrifice for the satisfaction of the Lord. It's just not there. I remember as children, we would, as sort of Christians, really not very much, but sometimes, mainly when a more Christian type of relative would visit for dinner, we would say grace. We'd thank the Lord, basically, some very simple little sentence or two. That was just as far as it got. But only when, relatives or people who are more religious came to visit for dinner. Otherwise, you just go for it. That's it. Just go for it. There you go. So, of course, the people think, or even the living entities think, that it's just there for our enjoyment. Particularly the human beings. They really, they're doing their absolute best to get as much from the planet for their use of sense gratification or assisting in sense gratification. I saw an article just, I don't know, a few days, maybe on the weekend, that who is going to own the moon? Like a fairly serious thing. Who's going to own it? Because, if they actually go there, that's another subject, but if they actually go there, then you can be sure they're going to lay claim to different parts of it and try and use it for their usual program of sense gratification in one way or another. So this planet and the material nature in general, it can be used in different ways, or it can be seen in different ways. It can be seen, it should be seen as a great field for sacrifice, with so many opportunities for performing sacrifice, which will bring us closer to the Lord and ultimately back to Godhead. But the materialist is seeing it as a great field for enjoyment, sense gratification. That's all. Eat, drink, and be merry, and just extract as much as you can from the material nature. And the material nature is fighting back step by step, it's, because there's the process of what they call, I don't know the pronunciation exactly, but desertification. You know what I mean? Different areas are turning into deserts, which previously were green, but now the greenness is gone because of climate, and now they're turning into deserts. And it's interesting, we flew up to Joburg, I think, anyway we flew from Port Elizabeth recently, the last few weeks. And along the shore, just to the north of Port Elizabeth, just immediately to the north, there are these beaches and like unexploited land with just bushes and stuff. But you can see some of it has turned to desert, because there's these areas of white sand back from the beach, and surrounding it is just all this undergrowth and bushes and small trees. So that process of desertification is going on in places which previously were green at least, and capable of producing. So it can be seen properly as a place for sacrifice and utilized like that, or it can be used as a place for our sense gratification, and then the whole program of deterioration occurs. And it can also be seen, in sort of religious type terms or quasi-religious, as a place for punishment or place for suffering, because there's a lot of that goes on. So much of that is going on. Yeah, in some countries, in my, place of birth, New Zealand, in the main cities, particularly Auckland, you can't buy a house unless you're a multi-millionaire. Even just an pretty ordinary house you can't buy unless you're really quite wealthy. I mean, very well established. Otherwise, young people who just left university and they've got a job and all that. But the best they can do is rent a place. And even that can be very difficult because the rents go up. And in England, it's the same thing. Unless you've got money, you can't buy a house. Unless, it's way out in the sticks in some remote, undeveloped area. So there's a lot of suffering. And what to speak of when people get diseases, like these deep diseases, these heavy diseases, cancer, and even some diseases. One of my disciples in Mauritius, a few years ago, got some sort of bacterial or microbial something. They never knew what it was. Of course, Mauritius is not advanced scientifically, but they tried to figure out what it was and treat it. They could never figure it out, and he just sort of faded away and passed away. Really nice devotee, gosh. So the material nature is fighting back. And we're in our happy little Krishna conscious bubble here. Which is great, actually. It's really nice. It's really fantastic. But there's a lot of people out there just in Chatsworth who, it's not easy for. Yes, so people end up suffering, and it can be seen as a place for punishment of the wayward souls. Yes, so Prabhupada makes the point, although there is immense potency within the earth for the production of grains, fruits, and flowers, this production is checked by the earth itself. It's personal. Mother Earth objects. It's not just sort of happening, you know. Climate change is just happening. Mother Earth is objecting and withdrawing step by step more and more. And, you know, by the time the youngest of you, those of you who are still at university or just, you know, you haven't maybe reached 30 yet, within your lifetimes, it'll be really different even from what it is now. Probably. I mean, we assume. That's what Prabhupada's saying. Unless, you know, there's just a change on such a deep level that the people, I think, will have to go through a lot more before they're ready to go on to such a deep level. So, but the basic process, basic program is, the basic fact of life is that sacrifice has to be an integral part of people's way of life. Sacrifice ultimately for the Supreme Lord. You know, if we look around, we see, this is actually something I realized before I became a devotee, that people are sacrificing already, but not in the right ways, in the sense that they have to sacrifice their time to work. Yeah, they would rather be at the beach or something like that, but they have to go to work. And, you know, who enjoys working? So many people hate working. They hate it with a vengeance. It disgusts them. Really, it's a fact. Maybe not everyone, but some people, quite some people, they actually hate working. But they can't avoid it. It's a sacrifice. You have to sacrifice your time. Time is money. It's one thing to donate money as a sacrifice, but giving your time is also a donation. It's also a sacrifice. And the boss is trying to pay as little as possible, in most cases, so many, and the workers are trying to do as little as possible and get as much as possible. Yeah, so it's difficult. When I was first visiting Russia quite some years ago, the devotees told me an old Soviet joke. Yeah. The factory inspector comes to the factory to inspect the workers. He walks in, the first worker is asleep. He makes a note. He walks a little further. The next worker is just reading the paper or something, Just the inspector makes a note. The next one is drunk, totally drunk and just wiped out. He makes a note. Then he makes a report at the end. Too many workers doing the same job. Anyway, sorry, you went past you. And I'll tell you another one. It's related. Ivan. In Russia they pronounce it Ivan. But anyway, Ivan goes to buy a car. So, okay, he buys the car, pays the money, and he asks the salesman, so when can it be delivered? Salesman looks at the schedule and says, Ivan, you won't believe it. We can deliver this car on this same day in 5 years. And Ivan says, in the morning or the afternoon? And the salesman says, Ivan, what does it matter? You know, it's 5 years. And Ivan said, no, it's important. The plumber's coming in the morning. Anyway, excuse me. But it's interesting, these observations that ordinary people make about the material world. So the thing is, yeah, sacrifice has to really become established, and, you know, Krishna consciousness has to become established. That's the basic thing. And Srila Prabhupada doesn't here mention it. No, he doesn't actually. He's definitely going to, as the verses go on, these apparently 6 verses or so, just sort of exploring the subject. But particularly the Sankirtan Yajna has to go on. If the Sankirtan Yajna doesn't go on, then even if you're doing some sacrifice, like religiously, then it will not be so complete as it could or should be. And we see that even in places like Vrindavan and places, you know, where there's temples, nice temples, but somehow or other, I mean, it's one thing if the temple becomes popular. Giriraj Maharaj actually told me that Prabhupada was approached by one man about, I don't know, maybe our temple in Mumbai, about one of our temples, that the man said, you know, you should make up some story how people have given money to this temple and become really wealthy. And the man said, you know, that's what they did in Tirupati. Because, you know, if you've been there, you would know. It's way out of the way. Talk about, you know, unless you've got a vehicle, talk about being difficult to get to. You know, sometimes you see these little Hindu temples on tops of hills in India with stairs going up. Then, gosh, you'd have to be fit to go up there. But how about going up to the temple at Tirupati, Tirumala? Shoo! Some people would definitely expire on the way. So the man said, yeah, it was just this little temple out of the way. But then somehow they started a rumor that people went there and prayed there and donated there and became wealthy. So apparently this happened. And this man suggested to Prabhupada that we do it for at least one of our temples to, you know, make the temple rich. But Prabhupada said no. You heard that? Yeah. Prabhupada said no, we will not do that because we're interested in pure devotional service. Yeah. And of course, you know, the story they've made up in Tirupati. It's quite amazing. The deity, who traditionally is called Srinivas, is in debt to Varaha because Varaha owns the hills, yeah. And he's got to pay back some fantastic amount. Anyway, okay. But yeah, Yagyartat Karmanonyatra Lokayam Karma Bandhana. That sacrifice has to be done. Otherwise your work binds you to this world. So sacrifice has to be developed. Otherwise, like I was saying actually, that you get these temples, so many in Vrindavan, which are not famous, and therefore don't get a lot of people and don't get a lot of money. And sure, so many of them are not doing very well. It's a battle. And, you know, if you go to a temple like Radha Damodar, you see on the altar is what? 4, is it? I think 4 sets of Radha Krishna, like big Radha Krishna deities. And it's not that they established the temple with all those deities. It's that the other temples went bankrupt and they couldn't afford to worship those deities. So they got handed over to, the much more popular temple. And there are a number of other temples that have loads of deities, really a lot of deities. So even if you're performing Krishna consciousness, but you're not really developing the Sankirtan Yajna, then the whole process is not complete. And so difficulty sets in regards to getting necessities of life. So Prabhupada concludes by saying, such people who are just doing things for sense gratification will gradually become poverty-stricken, but they cannot use things which are to be enjoyed by the Supreme Lord for their own sense gratification. If they continue like this, there will ultimately be a state of poverty, and no grains, fruits, or flowers will be produced. Indeed, it's stated in the 12th canto of the Bhagavatam that at the end of Kali Yuga, people will be so polluted that there will no longer be any grains, wheat, sugar cane, or milk. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Any comments, questions, anything? Sridharada Prabhu.
Yeah, I was just thinking, like in relation to the Russian jokes, that even we see it now, like people are sort of being encouraged to accept like mediocrity as a norm, in life, and like waiting 5 years for a car or a plumber. It seems like an extreme, but that seems to be like a mood settling in. Like South Africa, with the service delivery experience we have, it's so ridiculous, so pathetic. But okay, let's tolerate. So it seems like there's like a I don't know, not a conspiracy, but like a mood permeating. Just accept this poor situation and live with it, and it's okay.
Right.
And sometimes I find, like for myself, like even in Krishna consciousness, like you feel like it's okay, just accept the situation and don't aspire for something better, greater, And even though we can see like the whole decay and dismantling of everything around us, we seem to be like okay with it, living in our bubble, so to speak.
Yes.
But I mean, it's terrible out. I mean, when you went to Tongat the other day, what crazy devastation, And I just feel sometimes we may be just, because we're in a very safe situation, so to speak, we may forget what's really out there. And we may be like calm and satisfied in our own Krishna consciousness, whereas it's lurking. I mean, we felt it in 2021, the riots, right? It could have devastated us in a moment.
Could have, yeah.
But then now I feel like, okay, everything's nice again. Let's just carry on calmly,
Right.
How do we as devotees avoid that? When the reality, like in what's being spoken in reverse, what's going on, the degradation, how do we avoid that
Complacency, yeah. That I'm okay, by Krishna's mercy. Yeah. Well, if the Hindu community somehow goes totally bankrupt, then we'll have to think, boy, I tell you, life will become different. But yes, how do we avoid complacency when we're living comfortably? I think an important part of it is that we should involve ourselves with the communities preaching and so on, preaching in different ways, And so we actually see what's going on. Otherwise you can get, back in the old days we used to do that. Everybody was out. Doing something, either book distribution or Harinam or whatever, and contacting the people and seeing what's going on. But sometimes some devotees who would normally do that would stay back in the temple, and they would get a type of disease. We used to call it temple-itis. And it's sort of basically what you're talking about, something like that. Yeah, you just get, in your little bubble, your little spot, and you've got things sorted. You've got nice prasadam, Jai is cooking, bread and soup and whatnot, etc. Another Sukamari is cooking, and gee whiz, what more could you ask for? Not a lot. But if we don't have contact with the degradation, etc., all of that, then because we're conditioned souls, and we've still got conditioned tendencies even after years of trying to practice Krishna consciousness, there's that tendency, like, to just sort of become complacent where you are with what you have, and even to be accepting, like, I don't know if I should mention it, but we used to have this nice terrazzo around, and, time being what it is, and people walking all over it, some of it would break up and got replaced by just concrete. And we're walking around every day, and we may not even think, this is not as nice as what it's meant to be. You know what I mean? Yeah. And there was one thing they didn't quite finish in the temple room. Maybe I'll show you one time. Rajran told me. It's right where I sit when I'm up there, just up there. There's a little thing that he told me didn't get properly finished. Yeah. Or like, anyway, it's easy to become complacent. I don't want to start complaining. Not complaining, but pointing out things too much. But if we're preaching regularly and going out and preaching regularly in one way or another, including prasadam distribution and whatever, then you see more vividly, more clearly how people are struggling. I remember going in Joburg, there's probably a few, but we went to do Food for Life. In one area, it was still white, but it was poor white people. And I mean like really poor white people. And these people came running out to get prasadam. Boy, oh boy, because they were struggling to get enough to eat. And they're white people, they're meant to be, traditionally the wealthy people. They were really not wealthy. And they were so grateful and appreciative and not objecting to the chanting at all, but chanting along, and because their false egos had been smashed. But it's interesting, to go to places like that and be involved and try and help the people who are struggling. Because it gives perspective. When you're in a nice situation, you lose objectivity, you lose perspective. and you just become subjectively involved in your own on your own terms. But of course, we've got to read the books. We've really got to read the books. Read the Bhagavatam and read Bhagavad Gita and read all the books. Because Prabhupada is pointing out, like here, he's pointing out all the time what the material world is like. And it's not just philosophy, it's descriptions of reality. So, yeah, we should really study the books, and in order to really get into these things, all of these things, we have to chant nicely. If we don't really try and really chant attentively, things won't sink in, because our consciousness will be dulled or not sort of opened up by the effects of the chanting. It's a type of an answer, I guess. Hare Krishna. Yeah. And here, let me tell you one funny thing about the material world. There's the Rolls-Royce motor car company, and they produce, and there are more expensive cars, a few, like super specialist vehicles, but Rolls-Royce, everybody who knows about motor cars knows what Rolls-Royce is meant to be. I don't know what it's like now, but in England, you had to buy a Rolls-Royce in advance. You had to pay in advance, like 3 months, 6 months before you'd get delivery. And people who got and a Rolls-Royce, which was, say, 6 months old, was more expensive than a brand new Rolls-Royce, because you could get it. Like, a good amount, like 5% more expensive than if you walk in to buy one and pay for it. A second-hand one, not too old, but it's second-hand, was more expensive. Interesting. Economics. Maybe I should have mentioned that. I don't think we're going to buy Rolls-Royces around here. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.